You are sitting in a crowded room. You look around at the faces. You see minor variations in eye color, hair texture, and height, but everyone is fundamentally the same. You assume humanity has always looked exactly like this, but the real answer is far stranger. Today, you are the only type of human on Earth. It feels normal to be completely alone on the evolutionary tree. But for 99% of your history, this was not the case. What if being the only human species is actually the weirdest thing about you? Look back 300,000 years. The world was a deeply crowded place. You did not have the planet to yourself. You shared it with at least 6 other distinct human species. They were not apes. They were not primitive grunting monsters dragging knuckles in the dirt. They were humans, just like you, but built differently. Imagine walking through a dense European forest during the Ice Age. You hear a sudden snap of a twig. You lock eyes with someone who is undeniably human, but entirely alien. Who is staring back at you? Meet the Neanderthals. They are the most famous of your ancient cousins. You probably picture them as hunched, slow-witted cavemen. That is a lie your modern ego tells you. They stood completely upright. They possessed brains that were actually slightly larger than yours. They survived the most brutal, unforgiving ice ages the planet ever experienced. Paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer has spent decades mapping their physical adaptations to extreme environments. He found that their thick bones, barrel chests, and wide noses were perfectly engineered to trap heat in a frozen wasteland. They were the ultimate prehistoric survivalists. They hunted massive woolly mammoths with heavy thrusting spears. They wore animal skins for warmth. They buried their dead with purpose and care. They made art deep inside dark, winding caves. So why are they gone? You used to think your ancestors simply wiped them out. The story was always a triumphant tale about your superior intellect conquering the slow-witted brutes. The reality is much more complicated and far more intimate. They did not just vanish overnight in a bloody war. You lived alongside them for thousands of years. You shared hunting valleys with them. You watched their campfires burning across the river at night, and you did much more than just watch. In 2010, geneticist Svante Pääbo changed your understanding of history forever. He achieved what many scientists thought was biologically impossible. He sequenced the complete Neanderthal genome from incredibly ancient degraded bone fragments. He won a Nobel Prize for this groundbreaking work. What did he find? He found them inside you. If your ancestors are from anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you carry about 2% Neanderthal DNA in your cells right now. You did not just fight the Neanderthals. You mated with them. You had children together. You absorbed them into your own expanding bloodline. Your immune system actively uses their genetic code today to fight off modern viruses. They never truly went extinct. They just melted into you. But the Neanderthals were not your only neighbors. Travel east to the freezing Altai Mountains of Siberia. A massive cave sits high above a sweeping river valley. Inside this cave, scientists found something impossibly small. It was a single piece of a pinky bone from a young girl. It did not look like much to the naked eye, but when Svante Pääbo's team extracted the DNA, they found a biological ghost. The DNA did not match yours. It did not match a Neanderthal. It belonged to an entirely new, previously unknown species of human. They are called the Denisovans. You know almost nothing about what they actually looked like. You only have a few oversized teeth, a jawbone, and that tiny pinky fragment. But their genetic legacy is massive. They dominated the Asian continent for hundreds of thousands of years. They adapted to extreme high altitudes where your body would simply shut down from a lack of oxygen. And just like the Neanderthals, you met them in the wild. You interbred with them too. If you look at the DNA of modern Tibetans, you will find active Denisovan genes. That specific genetic code alters how their red blood cells carry oxygen, allowing them to breathe easily in the thin air of the Himalayas. You essentially borrowed their evolutionary homework to survive in extreme places where you did not belong. How many other ghosts are hiding in your blood? Now, leave the freezing mountains and travel to the tropical islands of Indonesia. You arrive on the humid, isolated island of Flores. The jungle is thick and incredibly loud. Here, the rules of evolution get very weird. On small islands, large animals slowly shrink over time because food is scarce. Elephants on this island evolved to be the size of small ponies. And what happened to the humans who got trapped here? they shrank too. They are known to science as Homo floresiensis. The world affectionately calls them hobbits. They stood barely 3 feet tall, fully grown. Their brains were roughly the size of chimpanzees. You might think a brain that small means they were simple, instinct-driven animals. You would be entirely wrong. They crafted sharp stone tools. They hunted those pony-sized elephants in coordinated groups. They controlled fire to cook their meat. They survived on this isolated island until roughly 50,000 years ago. That means your fully modern, tall ancestors could have stood on the beaches of Indonesia and watched tiny humans hunting dwarf elephants in the jungle. It sounds like a ridiculous fantasy novel. It is documented, peer-reviewed scientific fact. How would you react to meeting a human that barely comes up to your waist? The strangest encounter of all was wading deep underground in South Africa. In 2013, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger made a discovery that completely shattered the established timeline of human evolution. Deep inside the Rising Star cave system, through a limestone chute so incredibly narrow that only the skinniest scientists could squeeze through, lay a hidden chamber. The floor was completely covered in bones. They did not belong to you. They belonged to Homo naledi. They were a bizarre, confusing mix of ancient and modern anatomical features. Their shoulders were built for swinging gracefully through trees. Their feet were perfectly shaped for walking upright on the ground. Their brains were tiny, only a third the size of yours. By all established scientific logic, a creature with a brain that small should not be capable of complex symbolic thought. Yet, there is a massive, terrifying problem. The chamber they were found in is incredibly difficult to reach. There is absolutely no natural sunlight. There are no animal bite marks on the bones to suggest a predator dragged them down there. The evidence suggests only one chilling, profound conclusion. Homo naledi was intentionally navigating deep into pitch-black caves, likely using controlled fire, to carefully bury their dead. This changes everything you thought you knew about what makes you special. You always assumed that deep rituals, grief, and complex problem-solving required your massive, energy-hungry brain. Homo naledi proves that arrogant assumption wrong. A tiny brain can still harbor a deep, complex, and deeply emotional inner life. They were mourning their dead in the dark at the exact same time your ancestors were walking the sunlit plains of Africa. You did not have a monopoly on grief. You did not have a monopoly on humanity. What else are you wrong about? So, look at the entire board. You have the cold weather survivor Neanderthals in Europe. You have the high-altitude Denisovans in Asia. You have the island-dwelling hobbits in Indonesia. You have the deep cave explorers of Homo naledi in Africa. And there were even others. Homo luzonensis was hiding out in the jungles of the Philippines. Homo erectus, the longest surviving human species ever, was still wandering parts of the globe. The world was a vibrant, messy, beautifully diverse ecosystem of human variations. Then, suddenly, the lights went out. One by one, every single other human species vanished from the face of the earth. The archaeological timeline is brutal and fast. By 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were gone. The Denisovans faded away. The hobbits disappeared. You were the only one left standing on the stage. Why did you survive when everyone else died? It is the greatest murder mystery in the history of the planet. You desperately want to believe it was because you were simply better. You want to credit your massive frontal lobe, your complex spoken language, or your superior weapons. But the archaeological record does not easily support that flattering narrative. Neanderthals had complex language. They created cave art. They possessed hunting tools just as lethal and sharp as yours. For tens of thousands of years, you lived right next to them and did not have any clear advantage. In fact, when your early ancestors first tried to leave Africa and enter Neanderthal territory in the Middle East, they were pushed back and defeated. The Neanderthals won the first round decisively. The true secret to your survival was not raw intelligence. It was not physical strength. It was your social network. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar studies the complex limits of social groups in modern primates. He found a direct mathematical correlation between neocortex size and the number of relationships a primate can successfully maintain. Your specific brain allows you to track about 150 stable, meaningful relationships. This is known in psychology as Dunbar's number. Neanderthals likely had a much smaller number. They lived in small, heavily isolated family bands. They rarely interacted with other groups outside their immediate valley. When a harsh winter hit, or a crippling disease swept through their camp, they had no one to ask for help. They died alone in the cold. You did something entirely different and incredibly powerful. You built vast, interconnected networks of strangers. You traded shiny seashells across hundreds of miles of brutal terrain. You maintained friendships and alliances with people you had not seen in years. When a severe drought hit your valley, you did not just sit there and starve. You packed up your belongings and moved to a neighboring valley where your distant trading partners lived. You shared crucial information. You passed down life-saving innovations. If a Neanderthal invented a better spear, that incredible invention died the moment their small family group died. If your ancestors invented a better spear, that brilliant idea spread across an entire continent like a virus. You did not outsmart the other human species, you simply out-cooperated them. You were the most hypersocial ape to ever exist in the universe. You used shared fiction, myth, and abstract beliefs to bind thousands of complete strangers together. You formed massive tribes, then sprawling cities, then global empires. The other humans simply could not scale their isolated societies to match your relentless networking. You swallowed their hunting territories. You absorbed their most useful, climate-adapted genes. You left them in the dust of history. This brings you all the way back to the present moment. You look around and see a unified, single species completely dominating the globe. You build towering skyscrapers. You split the microscopic atom. You argue with strangers on the internet. You assume you are the ultimate pinnacle of evolution, sitting alone at the top of a linear, predictable ladder. But evolution is not a ladder. It is a wildly branching, chaotic bush. You are just the last surviving, fragile twig on a very large, heavily pruned branch. Your extreme isolation is a very recent anomaly in the grand story of life. Your distant ancestors would be terrified by how incredibly lonely the world feels right now. They were entirely used to a world filled with others. They were used to looking across a river and seeing the eyes of someone who was definitely human, but not quite identical. You carry the heavy legacy of all those vanished ghosts inside you today. You use their ancient genes to breathe at high altitudes. You use their genetic armor to fight off modern sickness. They built the unseen biological foundation that you stand upon right now. You are not a pure, singular creation. You are a messy, beautiful mosaic of every human experiment that came before you. So pay close attention the next time you are out in public. Watch the way people interact, share trivial information, and cooperate effortlessly with complete strangers. That invisible web of social connection is the only reason your bloodline survived the freezing darkness of the Pleistocene. You are sitting in a crowded room. You assume it has always been this way. But for the first time in history, you are truly alone.